Welcome to The Adaptive Mind, where we talk with experts about practical, effective approaches to breaking habits and changing behavior. I'm your host, Brady Dowling. I'm glad you're listening. After the episode, be sure to head over to theadaptivemind.com, where you'll find the full show notes and transcript from our discussion, as well as an episode cheat sheet. Each cheat sheet has the most important points, quotable moments, and specific actions you can take to implement the strategies we discuss. Head to theadaptivemind.com to access a cheat sheet for every episode. Welcome to this episode of The Adaptive Mind. Today we're talking with Craig Knight, and we're going to be talking about working from home. This is an episode I've been looking forward to for quite a long time. I have a lot of experience working from home and also a lot of experience being distracted and feeling isolated and a lot of the challenges that come with it. So I'm really excited to jump into this. Craig, if you want to give just a brief background about yourself, and then we can jump into the questions.
Sure. I'm a workplace psychologist. I'm chartered in the UK, registered in the UK, and I've been looking at the effects of leadership, management, and design, and how they affect people in whatever kind of workplace they find themselves in, whether it's home or office or somewhere in between.
Awesome. So I feel like it's kind of common for people to have started working from home since the pandemic. Can you give like a bit of almost a history of working from home and how things have changed since the pandemic?
Sure. It's really interesting that people are looking at working from home, at hybrid working as something new, when it isn't new at all. You know, it's almost the first form of working we had when people, and typically women, actually used to do spinning and so forth in the home. That was a form of hybrid working where they'd take the work into the farm, pick it up, work there, come back again. That was a form of hybrid working. Then what was very interesting, as management starts to become more in control of the work process, the Industrial Revolution progressed, the people that worked from home were the managers, were the people who could please themselves where they worked from. What a guy called Paul Morrell, who was chairman of the British Council of Offices, called the privileged, self-monitored, self-managed few. They were the ones that could work from home and do hybrid working whenever they want. And COVID was in many ways a great emancipator. And COVID allowed many, many more of us to work from home. And lots of the issues now about managers and the senior people in industry, politicians on both sides of the pond calling people back to work, speaks not to them thinking the office needs to be more productive than people in the workplace, but speaks to them thinking, hang on, these people are treading on our ground. We don't want people to sort of have the privileges that we've got. We want them where we can see them and control them. We can come and talk about that a little bit later on, because hybrid isn't there for a long time. And it's a very useful, very good way of working when it's done properly. In many ways, probably better than the models we have in other areas.
Continuing off of that kind of hybrid approach and work from home being around for a long time, for people who maybe have started somewhat recently or people who are new, what are some common behavioral patterns or habits that can make working remotely more challenging?
Challenging. Well, working from home is a state that's best enjoyed when you're enjoying doing it. And the things that are difficult working from home, and we found this, we did a long survey going through COVID, is resource. Accessing all the resource you need to do the job. And things that are resources, of course, not just kit, it's things like people. So accessing the colleagues that you work with, the interaction with your peers, that's something that's quite hard to replicate working from home. Even in this kind of environment where we're Zooming, and of course Zoom zoomed in during lockdown, but it's not quite the same as being in a space where you can talk face to face, where you can go in and you can borrow things, where you can just drag somebody off for an impromptu coffee. So the resource, particularly the resource in terms of people, is quite a hard thing to replicate. And something else that's also quite challenging is switching off. You know, when you go to somewhere to work, you're working 9 till 5, or you're working 7 till 6, or whenever it is, but there's generally a shut-off time when you leave. It's a much grayer area when you work from home. That's also quite a hard thing to do. And so maybe one more that's quite salient, and that is not being seen. That worries people quite a bit. Because people that get promoted, people that feel like they're being noticed, tend to be the ones under those managers' noses, we spoke about the managers' perspective before, who they can see. And there's a great deal of FOMO connected with people that work from home, just as there used to be FOMO with people working in branch offices and not headquarters, a similar kind of thing. There are others, but those are three pretty salient ones to start
Yeah.
with.
So you talked about kind of a few different categories almost. Part of
Yeah.
it is, I think, like our own personal mental health. So feeling fulfilled, feeling like you're seen, feeling like
Mm.
you have access to other people, but then also kind of like the professional productivity, efficiency kind of thing, like being able to get answers from other people, being able to advance in your career and things like that. Um, so, how can someone, speaking to both of those kind of areas, um, how can someone set themselves up for success, maybe compensating in different ways
Okay.
for themselves personally, let's say like socially, mental health wise?
Okay. Well, I think the thing to notice is there's a split at the moment between people that argue that office is best and people that argue that working from home is best. And when you look at the data, what they show us is that there's really very little difference depending on where you work in terms of productivity, in terms of well-being, in terms of anything like that. There's really not a lot of difference. The most important thing, and the reason that working from home can contribute so well to workplace performance, is that you can choose to do it. If you're allowed that choice, that's the crucial thing. And if you are having difficulties with all things we spoke about in terms of working from, I think go in. You need both. You do need a center where you can go to meet people and you can pick up ideas and you can recharge your batteries with people. If you and I are part of a company, we can Zoom quite a lot. But every now and again, what we need to do is go and break bread, really. That's the ideal thing to do. So if you are suffering with all of these things, then go to the head office, go to the office, wherever it is, and interact with people. It is important. It's just as important to go to an office and see the people as it is to have your own space and work from home. Both are good. Neither are good when they're forced on you. And they're both best if you can do both of them at the same time, in the same job, if that helps.
Right. And do you feel like, let's say there are some companies where they're purely remote. Um,
Yeah,
is there a way to kind of make up for the interactions that you might have with coworkers? Maybe I know there are co-working spaces, there are other things that people have kind of come up with. Are those, um, yeah,
sure.
I guess what's the kind of effectiveness there and the approach?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, if you just look to one side for a moment in the gaming world, where people interact with people that they're never going to meet ever, they are still building, the psychologists are finding now, really quite meaningful relationships. To say that I only know somebody online and therefore to be dismissive of that relationship is not really that helpful anymore because we're getting some genuinely useful relationships. The issue, of course, is that there is a qualitative and quantitative difference between relationships online and relationships in person. Somebody you might, and dating agencies know this all over the place, of course, people that you might get on with really well online, you might despise when you meet them face to face. You might go from hugging them to wanting to throttle them. So, if you're working from home exclusively and you're in a remote location, then just build up the relationships online. If that's what you've got, do it. If you have social meetings, have a social meeting online, because the best medicine that we have is nothing to do with pharmaceuticals, it's each other. So the more interaction we get, the more sociable we can be with other people, the better it is for our well-being. And if that means socializing online, if you can't go and have a beer with somebody, you can't go and share a pizza, wherever it is, then meet them online, but do it. I mean, one of the best things that happened, and this at the start of lockdown, things changed dramatically during the course of it, was at the start of lockdown, everybody was in it together. And even managers were phoning up not to say, where are you, but how are you? And there was a strong sense of community actually in that first series, that first sense of lockdown. And you can recreate that if you have to work remotely by having social events, by having a Friday afternoon beer if you want, whatever you choose to do. So keep the interaction. People are the most important resource that we have. Working from home fills two of the three categories of the perfect job really well. It can give you, a lot of autonomy. It implies if you've got the autonomy that you're getting trust. The third thing is the resource, and you can struggle a bit there. So try to build that, and that will help all the things, particularly mental well-being. We buttress each other in terms of well-being.
Yeah. So I really like you focusing on those three areas. Can you just say those again and then
Yeah,
kind
sure.
of
It's really easy.
talk to maybe
Yeah,
where working from
any
home is strengthened?
yes, absolutely. Well, the three things. First of all, I'll come back to the second part of the question. The three things that are good in any job, whether you're a deep sea diver or a professional footballer, it doesn't matter. If you want a really good job, then remember art, or rat if you want, but art's a bit of a nicer word to remember. That's autonomy, resource, and trust. If you've got those things in your job, you've got a great job. And the more diminished those things are, the worse the job you have. Right?
How does working from home or working remotely, how does it lend itself to actually benefiting um, areas of that kind of three-pronged beneficial approach
Well,
of work?
yeah, and we spoke about autonomy already. It gives you a better work-life balance because you should be able to manage your time. I'm going to come back to this and caveat this, but it should give you a better idea of being able to do your own work-life balance. You can please yourself to an extent, how long you work for. You don't have things, for example, like commuting stress. You can get up and you can go, as I do, from the house into the shed, which is a walk of about 30 yards, but I'm in my workplace. That's really nice. It will improve your mental well-being for the general part because you're not getting all these micro stresses that go on. And that's particularly true, for example, if you're neurodivergent. Or if you've got particular, let's say ADHD or something, you can set up your workspace at home to suit you. You don't have to make the compromise in a communal space that you would have to do otherwise. But it's also, by default, of course, a more inclusive environment because it's yours. And finally, on that as well, linked again, it helps you to get away from toxic work environments. There's an awful lot, 70%, we can talk about this, 70% of work environments contain toxic elements within them. And when you work from home, you can avoid those almost altogether. So long as, and I want to caveat this now, what's happening with people working from home is that managers, as we said before at the start of this, don't like it very much because they can't supervise them. So there is now a plethora of software tools that companies install on people's laptops so that they can see precisely what they're doing when they're working from home. And by doing that, by spying on the people that work for you, you degrade all of the benefits we've just spoken about. All of them. Because particularly for what you're doing is you're saying we don't trust you. And we spoke about earlier how managers say at the start, well, how are you? What's going on now is managers saying, well, where are you? And I get reports, for example, as a bloke I was talking to the other month, and his manager said to him, well, where were you at 3:30 in the afternoon? I went to pick the kids up. Well, couldn't your partner do that? We want you at work. And if you look online, if you just look on monitoring employees from home, you will find that what these tools do is they'll tell managers what websites you're on, how long you've been there, what you've done on those websites, and what files you accessed. So it denudes everything good about working from home and imports all the really nasty stuff of working in a tightly controlled office into your home space. And that's really psychologically damaging.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack there. The sound of that kind of work environment is really scary to me. I don't think I would ever want to be in that situation. So you touched on tools that can be used to track you. I know there are also a plethora of tools that people use personally to improve their productivity. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations about tools that people could use
Yes,
to
productivity.
benefit
I'll
themselves?
tell you what, productivity. Okay, let somebody define it for me, because people don't know what the hell they're talking about. I defy you to find a company that knows what it is. And I'll give you two examples as to why. All right. Let's go back to the good old call center where people are monitored to within an inch of their life, right? Because you can monitor everything. You can then maximize their productivity. A really common way of measuring productivity in a call center is to say how quickly somebody answers the phone, how quickly they deal with that phone call, and then how long it takes them to do the administration concerned with that call. So more calls, more productivity, you can monitor that. The most productive call, therefore, is when you pick up the phone, tell the person to get lost, put the phone down again, and get on with the next call. And you can go through thousands of calls like that. That's nonsense. Then you go into things like a boardroom or an HR department. And how do you measure productivity there? And even when you get to the gold standard of productivity, which people say sales figures, fine. We're two salespeople. You're a really good one, and I'm awful. But you don't know whether you're performing at your best or not. I might be responding really well to my work environment and performing at my peak, but you could be at half speed because you're not in the space that you need to be. But no one's got a bloody idea because they don't know how to measure it. So productivity in organizations does not exist. It is rubbish. And the commonest way of measuring it is to ask people by questionnaire, how productive are you? It's an objective measure. So Brady, if I said to you, well, that marathon that you ran, without looking at a stopwatch, how fast did you go? No, I'll ask you by questionnaire how fast you went. Oh, brilliant, Brady, you broke the world record. Well done, you're the new world record holder. You don't have a clue. Try driving a car without a speedo and see how fast you feel. If you're driving a little, a nice little MX-5 Mazda sports car, 50 miles an hour feels really fast. If you're in a nice big Cadillac, it feels like you're going really slow. So you don't know. And productivity is the same. People don't know how to measure it. It's objective. So there's rubbish spoken out there. And it's complex, but it's very doable. But yeah. So there you go. So productivity, and nonsense I give you.
Yeah. Yeah. So throw productivity out the window. Is there something else from an organizational perspective, maybe a little bit interesting, but I think more from a personal perspective, people that are listening and thinking like, okay, if I'm not focused on productivity, what should I be focused on?
Well, first of all, you can measure productivity. We can go back to this if you want to, but you just focus on yourself. I mean, the more content you are, the happier you are, the better you'll perform. There is a direct correlation to how happy people feel at work and how well they perform. And you know there's a scientific causal link between that. It's not correlation, it's causal. So the more content you are, the happier you are, the better you will be. And if you find, for example, that you're missing human contact, then push off into the main office for a bit and then come back to your home working space. If you're working in an office and this is all getting on top of me, then go and work from home. Be where you're at, you're most comfortable, you're most relaxed, and you're happiest, and you'll perform better. Which is why the monitoring we spoke about is such a negative step, because it undermines all of that and makes people feel miserable, and performance crashes as a result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in terms of someone's own happiness at work, does it come back to those three things, or are there other aspects that you would touch on for people to really think about and consider?
Everything comes back to autonomy, resource, and trust. They are the three levers. What they'll do is they will impact, for example, how you identify with the company. That's a really key thing. How you identify with your employer affects then everything else. You're given autonomy, resource, and trust. And I've got a really good company I'm working for here. That then increases what we call psychological comfort. And that's how much at ease you feel in the space. And once you've got that, you can then perform really well. And not only perform well, but feel better. So things like well-being increase, stress levels decrease, stuff like organizational citizenship, what you will do beyond the terms of your contract, increases when you have autonomy, resource, and trust, when you feel better, when you identify with the company that you work for. All of these soft and hard variables increase. So wherever you're working, home or anywhere else, those are the key things. But by giving people the choice between where they work, so people, let's say, can work, if they want to, let's say 3 days a week from home, if that's what they choose to do, and then go into the office a couple of days a week, that's really good for them. If they can, they choose to work 5 days a week from home, fine. That's probably really good for them. And managers, here's one that you might like. Managers need to stop thinking they're a super evolved species. That they are no more evolved than anybody else, and they need to stop treating the people that work for them like children. They either look after them really nicely, as let's say the large tech companies do, and they give them skateboards up and down corridors, let them have little drinkies on a Friday afternoon. They let them dress in trainers when they want to, all that, which is really nice of them. Or they're complete bastards to them, and they monitor them sort of within an inch of their life, and they don't trust them a little bit. And if they go to the toilet, they then quite accurately they're logged as to how long they go to the toilet for. Both of those things are parental. One's a really nice parent, and one's the kind that you want to leave home as soon as possible, but they're both parental. When you give people that autonomy and say, Brady, how would you like it to work? You're the expert in your space. You know your job better than me. What do you need? Rather than, we want you in here 3 days a week, mate, and you're not allowed to do this, that, or the other. It's far better to trust and empower the people that work for you.
Excellent. So for people who are in this situation that feel trusted, empowered, let's say that being on a screen all day has some of its challenges, distraction, news, all kinds of stuff. Even just looking at a screen can be mentally taxing, I think. I know for me it is, but how would you speak to people who have those kinds of challenges, whether it's distraction or just like tiring from looking at a screen? What are some kind of things that people can do to confront those challenges?
Just let me qualify that a bit, if you don't mind. When you say, let's say they're working and the screen is getting to them too much, are you saying that the general drain of the job is too much when they're looking at the screen, or they just have trouble looking at the screen as a typical thing?
Yeah, I think not necessarily a challenge of the job and relating to a job, but just purely the volume of time someone is looking at a screen.
Okay. All right. It goes back to something before about your job and being trusted, having the right to do that. Find what works for you best. Find what saccades of time you've got where you can stand looking at a screen and do that. So if you find that you can look at a screen for 45 minutes and that's too much, then you work in blocks of up to 45 minutes. You take breaks because people have different levels of attention that they can put up with. For especially as it seems, the younger you get, the younger you are now, as you move toward Gen Z, what you're finding is Gen Z are absolutely brilliant at spinning plates and looking at lots of different things at once. But when it comes to concentrating on stuff for a very long time, they're not that good. Whereas old gits like me, we're not too bad at concentrating long term. We're not awfully good at spinning plates. So if you're our boss in between and you're giving us the same thing to do, we're probably not going to, one of us isn't going to do it awfully well. You're much better off saying, okay, you two, here's a task I want you to do. Go and do it the best way you can. If you need help, ask. That way you're providing autonomy, you're trusting us to do it. You're saying, come to me for the resource if you need it. That's the way to do it. And then we, however we look at our screen times, will work it best to suit ourselves. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome.
So knowing a few of these things about kind of how working from home can be beneficial to somebody, to someone that's thinking about themselves personally. For someone that's looking into new jobs, what are some things that you would look for to basically check for these three areas, to know that you can be autonomous, that you can be trusted, and that you can have resource? How do you find that out when you're going into a job?
I think that's a really, really good question. I mean, recruitment is something I do quite a lot of. And the one thing that I would advise anybody to do when they go for a job is research the organization. Research it really hard and, phone up if you have to. And then during the interview itself, make sure you've got questions and you ask people, what are your working from home policies? How do you keep your eye on staff? What sort of resource do you provide with people? And ask the buggers. And if they respond nicely, then that's going to be a good job. If they say to you, well, we put this software on to make sure that your productivity is going where we need it to be, then walk away fast, run away really quite quickly and go and find something else. Just as a quick aside, it might help. When we do experimental workplace studies, we find essentially that there's a three-tier thing. Right? We start off looking at the really harsh managerial stuff. We monitor everything and we don't trust you type of management. And because that's ubiquitous, that's always our control. Now, in terms of working from home, that's where people just monitor the life out of you. You're not allowed any freedom at all. We then have, if you like, a fairly empowered space where you think, an enriched space where we'll say, well, look, the company seems to quite like us. And the company might say, well, Brady, that dog's lovely. Brady, they're going to say, we'll let you work from home 2-3 days a week. So you thought, that's nice, the company likes me, but they're not giving you much choice. And then the final one is they'll say, well, look, what we're going to do is we're going to let you work to the way that you need to. We'll let you interact with your team, and your team then has to meet these particular goals. But you decide between you, because you're all grown up, how it's done. Now, going across those three conditions, everything improves. In the really under the thumb condition that we spoke about at the start, all key organizational variables are depressed. It's not good for anything. It's an entirely toxic space. When you give them the enriched space where you say, well, look, we're going to look after you a little bit, things improve hugely. And that applies to management, to leadership, and to design. So when design, say, for example, give this space that makes a big difference, it does. So when you show people that you care for them, things go really well. When you say to people, look, we actually trust you, then you start to get this very useful orbiting going on. Rockets take off, they go into orbit, and they stay there. Because people can adjust that orbit themselves, and that suits the way they work. And that also suits the organization because they're meeting the targets that the company sets for them. It's always quite useful because it's an entirely virtuous circle.
Yeah, really interesting. So kind of rehashing a lot of what we talked about, it sounds like caring about people really kind of puts trust in them and enables them and kind of brings people together. And then also giving them this autonomy and this trust really builds their performance and kind of boosts them up and allows them to lift the whole organization. Is there anything that we either have touched on or that we have not touched on that you want to come back to or that you think would be helpful to say to people?
I think because we're talking about mostly working from home here, I just suggest that you don't be too lonely working from home. There's nothing wrong in working alone. And some people will be really, really happy working in a space where they just sit there, and this is the most face-to-face over the internet. This is the most communication I ever get. They're just happy working alone. Whereas somebody else might feel really lonely if they're stuck in a box 1 day a week. So if you work from home, it does tend to take a particular kind of mindset, and make sure that's you. Make sure when you go for a job that you do something like, a personality instrument, for example, is quite useful. It'll give you insight into what you're like. And some people thrive on working from home. Most people thrive with the choice. So they get some homework and they get some interaction. And there are a few people who want nothing to do with home working. Find out which one of those you are when you go for that job. Because if you're somebody who just wants to go in an office, then don't, for God's sake, get a job working from home. But to get the balance right is really what I say. And if you get the balance right and you get the company right and you get this autonomy, resource, and trust, you will then have a cracking job.
Awesome. So that's great insight. So we've talked about, we touched on co-working spaces, we've touched on hybrid work. Are there any other kind of social outlets that you would recommend in particular that would be helpful for helping people avoid isolation?
I would. Now and again, go and work in a coffee shop. Now and again, get out. Don't put up with cabin fever. Just go somewhere else and do other stuff. It's always useful. The same four walls are never good because one thing, it's for inspiration and creativity. Somebody once said you don't get your best ideas sitting at a desk. And there's quite a lot of truth in that. So make sure that you just get up, walk about, enjoy your environment, and do that. And be happy in your work. If you're happy in your work, that's great. And if you're not, try and find a place where you can be happy.
Excellent. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Craig. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I know I learned a lot personally, and I think listeners will be really appreciative of this. So thanks so much, Craig.
It's a pleasure, Brady. If you've got any other questions you want to follow up on, then please.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Adaptive Mind, brought to you by Nurture, the research-based app for overcoming unwanted or addictive behaviors. I hope you found our conversation insightful and inspiring. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue bringing these learnings to people that need them. Remember that you have an adaptive mind that does incredible things every day, and it's capable of even more. We'll see you in the next episode.